Yo, what is good people, Ben from Lover of Tech, and we are back with another video, this time camera comparison. iPhone 15 Pro versus the iPhone 14 Pro versus the Galaxy S23. We're going to be testing it in daylight and low light, pictures and videos to see how the camera experience is on all three cameras. Now it's going to be very difficult having to do this because I am self-shooting by myself on all these smartphones, but I do have the perfect companion, the Galaxy Watch 6, to actually help make the process a lot easier. So let me tell you about it. The Samsung Galaxy Watch with the Watch 6 Classic and the Watch 6 are the perfect companions for your Galaxy smartphone, especially for me when shooting and self-recording, as I am able to use the camera viewfinder app on the Watch 6 to perfectly frame myself for the best shot while getting maximum quality with the rear cameras. The Galaxy Watch 6 Classic sees the return of the iconic physical rotating bezel for a more classic circular timepiece look and smoother software interaction. Both the Watch 6 Classic and Watch 6 now have 30% slimmer bezels, faster performance, longer battery life, and most important, max screen brightness up to 2000 nits for great outdoor visibility. Check the link in the description for where you can get your Watch 6 Classic and Watch 6 for your Galaxy smartphone. Now back to the video. So we're starting off with the front-facing camera in 4K UHD 60 frames a second on the iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 14 Pro, and the Galaxy S23. Just seeing how the image quality is like, detail, sharpness, dynamic range, colors, as well as video stabilization. Quick run. We've now switched to the 4K UHD 30 frames a second video recorder mode on the selfie camera on the iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 14 Pro, and the Galaxy S23. And again, just seeing how the image quality, stabilization, dynamic range, colors and sharpness is like. Quick run. We're still recording in a 4K UHD 30 frames a second video recorder mode, but this time we are in the video portrait mode on the Galaxy S23 and a cinematic video on the iPhone 15 Pro and the 14 Pro. This is what applies the cinematic background blur to the image, giving you more focus on the subject in the frame. There's a few things to consider when it comes to control over the video portrait mode when using it. Now with the Samsung, while you're recording, you do have the ability to bring down the blur and bring it back up. The default blur is on 5, whereas with the iPhones it's on the f4.5 simulated aperture background blur. While you're recording, you can of course change it to different background effects, and you can also pause the video on the same clip and continue recording. The iPhone allows you to make the changes before you start recording. While you're recording, you don't have flexibility over doing that, but the power of the iPhone is that after you finish recording, it captures all the depth information. You can change the blur intensity, and most importantly, change the blur intensity. So give or take, this is the level of flexibility that is offered on both systems. We've now switched to the rear cameras and recording in the 4K UHD 30 frames a second video recorder mode on the iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 14 Pro, Galaxy S23, starting with the main 1x lens. Again, just seeing how the image quality is like, stabilization, colors, dynamic range, and detail. Quick run. Let's switch to the ultra-wide and all three. For my view, you can see that the iPhones do have a slightly wider field of view. And again, on the 4K 30 frames a second, you do have the ability to switch between the rear lenses while recording on the same clip. Quick run. Let's go through the phases. Go back to the 1x. Then we're going to switch to the 2x mode on all three cameras. We'll switch into the 3x dedicated zoom on all three. Just seeing how the image quality is like. And we're gonna go back to the main 1X camera. Here's a couple of things to go through the motion when recording in 4K 30. The Samsung Galaxy S23 does allow you to take pictures and also pause recording and continue while recording on the same clip. Another advantage it has is the ability to switch to the selfie camera and back to the rear cameras while you're recording on the same clips. This is something you can't do on the iPhone, where you can't pause and continue on the same clip, but you can still take pictures, but you can't switch to the selfie. And I'm going to demonstrate that right now. Still recording in 4K 30, and you still have the flexibility to take pictures, pause recording, continue, and flip back to the rear cameras. We are now recording in the 8K 30 frames per second video recorder mode on the Galaxy S23 and comparing it to the iPhone 15 Pro in 4K 30 and the iPhone 14 Pro in 4K 30. Quick run. We've now switched to the 4K UHD 60 frames per second video recorder mode, starting with the 1X main camera on the Galaxy S23, iPhone 15 Pro, and the iPhone 14 Pro. Again, just seeing how the image quality is like, stabilization, dynamic range, colors, and detail when we are in the high resolution, higher frame rate. Quick run. Here's where we're going to showcase some major usability flexibility improvements with the iPhone 15 Pro in 4K 60. As you can see, while you're recording on the same clip, you can switch between all the rear lenses from the ultra-wide 1X, 2X, as well as the 3X. This was not possible before when comparing it to the previous iPhone 14 Pro and also on the Galaxy S23. With those, if you want to record on the other lenses, you do have to completely stop recording, switch lenses and start again. One advantage you still get with Samsung is the ability to pause recording on the same clip, take pictures and flip to the selfie camera, which I'm going to demonstrate right now. While still recording in 4K 60, you can go back to the rear lens that you started recording from, but you can't switch between them at the back until you stop recording and start again. Hopefully that makes sense. So we've stopped recording and we've switched to the ultra-wide lens in 4K UHD 60 frames per second. This is mainly for the benefit of the Galaxy S23 and the iPhone 14 Pro. As demonstrated, the iPhone 15 Pro does not need to stop recording and switching lenses at the back in 4K 60. Quick run. And last focal length of testing in 4K 60, which is on the 3X dedicated zoom lens on all three phones, iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 14 Pro, and Galaxy S23. Just seeing how the image quality is like. And for funsies, with the iPhone 15 ultra-wide back to 3X. Love this. Absolutely love this. We've now switched to the action mode on the iPhone 15 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro, as well as the super stable, super steady mode on the Galaxy S23. We do have it recording on the ultra-wide angle lenses on all three. The iPhones do record in 2.8K. We're doing it in 30 frames a second. There is a 60 frames a second option. And the Samsung Galaxy records it in a 1440p QHD in 30 frames a second, and it does this on the ultra-wide as well as the 1X. The iPhones allow you to do it on other lenses. Let's start with the ultra-wide first, and we'll do a major run. We're still in the action mode and the super stable mode. We've now switched to the 1X lens and just seen how they perform. again, we're still in the action mode versus the super stable. And again, with the iPhones, you can do this still in 2.8K on a 3x dedicated zoom lens, whereas you don't have that option on the Samsung Galaxy S23. So just something to consider. Let's try it. So we're now recording in the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recording mode with the rear cameras. And we're basically starting with the 1X with me in the frame as the subject. And again, just seeing how it deals with it with a person in the subject, in the frame, and just seeing how it looks. Now you do get the flexibility of being able to switch to the other lenses. We're going to move to the ultra wide on all three. And pretty much seeing how the focal length change affects the quality in any way. Let's move over to the 2X crop mode on both. And we'll switch to the 3X. I'm going to be told if I need to back up a little bit. And we're back to the 1X. So we're now recording in the 8K video recorder mode on the Galaxy S23 compared to the 4K 30 on the iPhone 15 Pro and the 14 Pro. And just seeing how the image quality difference is like in the high resolution mode on the Samsung. Now switch to the 4K UHD 60 frames per second video recorder mode. We'll start with the 1X main cameras on the iPhone 15 Pro, Galaxy S23, as well as the iPhone 14 Pro. So here's where we're going to see the benefit and the improvements to flexibility on the iPhone 15 Pro. While you're recording on the same clip, you can actually switch to the other lenses, going to the ultra wide now. This is something that you cannot do on the other camera systems unless you stop recording and continue recording and switching on the other clip. So the iPhone gives you that flexibility. And back to the 1X on the iPhone. So for the benefit of the Galaxy S23 and the iPhone 14 Pro, we've now stopped recording, switched to the ultra wide in 4K 60, so you can see the image quality difference between the three. Again, for the fun of it, the iPhone 15 Pro does allow you to switch to the 1X. And the iPhone 15 Pro back to the ultra wide. All on the same clip. Well done, Apple. Great improvement. Last focal length to check, which is the 3x dedicated zoom lens in 4K UHD 60 frames per second on all three cameras, and just seeing how the image quality is like. Again, for the fun of it, the iPhone 15 Pro does allow you to go to 1X, ultra wide, and then you can zoom right back into me at 3X. We're recording in the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recorder mode, but this time in the video portrait mode versus the cinematic mode on the iPhone 15 Pro, 14 Pro, and the Galaxy S23. Now, here's something to really consider when you're looking at the video portrait mode. It does apply the background blur. And on the Samsung, you can see that while you're recording, as stated in our showcase, you can actually change the blur intensity, as well as obviously go in between the different types of background blurs you can do. The default is at 5, and you can do the different blur effects while you're recording. Obviously, once you finish recording, the iPhone does capture all the depth information to allow you to change the blur and the blur position. What's great about the iPhone 15 Pro in particular is that you can do a continuous zoom when you're in the video portrait mode. So if I need to step back, do let me know. But you can go all the way up to 2x, all the way up to the 3x without stopping recording, all on the same clip. That's a level of flexibility that's really good on the iPhone 15 Pro when it comes to the cinematic background blur. Whereas the others, you do have to stop recording and switch to the 3x to be able to do that. Only thing to consider is the user interface on the iPhone 15 Pro. When going to the 3x, it doesn't show you the 3x zoom option. It shows you the 1x and the 2x. But when you start doing the continuous zoom, it does allow you to go all the way up to the 3x. We're gonna come back to the 1x if we're not there already. So cinematic video versus the video portrait mode, 4K UHD 30 frames per second, now on the dedicated 3x zoom lens, mainly for the benefit of the iPhone 14 Pro and the Galaxy S23. Just seeing what the difference is like when it comes to the image quality. We are now recording in the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recorder mode on the rear cameras, starting with the main 1x lens on the iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 14 Pro, and the Samsung Galaxy S23. Just checking against the lens flaring. Let's switch to the ultra wide. Switch to one camera. 2x. In low light, the 3x most likely is cropping in onto the main sensor, so just be aware in that retrospect. Back to the main 1x. Back to the main 1x. We are now in the 4K UHD 30 frames per second video recording mode, this time on the selfie camera on the iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 14 Pro, and the Galaxy S23. Just seeing how the image quality is like in low lights. Let's now move over to the daytime images, starting with the landscape shots from the ultra wide, and I will say between the three it's hard to tell apart. Two things I did notice are the S23 does have a slightly more saturated and vibrant image to the colors, and you notice it more in the sky, while both iPhones have a wider field of view. Now moving to the main wide sensor, the iPhone 15 Pro now shoots 24 megapixel JPEG files by default compared to the 12 megapixels on the iPhone 14 Pro and S23, which by my analysis does produce a slightly more detailed and less processed image, but it feels quite minor as you do have to pixel peep to notice. One thing Apple has added is the option for additional crops on the main wide sensor with a 1.2x and a 1.5x option, while still keeping the 24 megapixel quality. When moving to the 2x mode, the iPhone 15 Pro looks to have improved compared to the iPhone 14 Pro, with more detail and a warmer image, with the S23 matching the processing quality with a slightly cooler tone. In the dedicated 3x zoom mode, I did notice that the iPhone 15 Pro does zoom in slightly further, even compared to the iPhone 14 Pro and S23, with both iPhones producing better clarity, with the iPhone 15 Pro producing warmer colors. In the extended zoom range at 10x, all three hold well, but I do prefer the look of the iPhone 15 Pro, followed by the iPhone 14 Pro and Galaxy S23, due to the better clarity of the leisure, league spanner, and the overall scene. Even though both iPhones top out at 15x compared to the 20x and 30x modes on the S23, although the S23 does have the advantage of further reach at the maximum zoom and better stability, the overall processing on the iPhones are still preferred. Here's another set of landscape images from the ultra-wide to the maximum zoom on the S23 at 30x and the iPhones at 15x. Thanks to the introduction of iOS 17, both iPhone 15 Pro and 14 Pro can shoot the full 48 megapixel JPEG mode without the need of shooting Pro RAW, matching the S23's 50 megapixel JPEG mode. In this situation, I definitely think the iPhone 15 Pro has good detail, dynamic range, and colors. This shot against the sun was a test to see how they all handle in a high contrast situation, but also a test to see how they manage lens flare. And looking at the main and ultra wide, both iPhones do a great job, with very minor flaring on the S23, and with the new Smart HDR on the iPhone 15 Pro, it does handle exposure control from the sun a lot better. Let's look at some close-up shots, and when considering the minimum focusing distance on the main wide sensor on all three, there seems to be no improvement on the iPhone 15 Pro compared to the 14 Pro, with both iPhones suffering from a long distance minimum focus on the main camera compared to the S23, which can get really close to the flower while still focusing and creating a nice natural blur. Where both iPhones claw it back is the ability to shoot in macro mode using an ultra wide lens, which makes a huge difference in getting closer to the flower and staying in focus. Let's take some selfie images, and both iPhones look very much the same when it comes to colors and overall detail. Although all three are not perfect when it comes to skin tones, for my skin shade, I do prefer the colors on the S23 ever so slightly, while the iPhones are more color accurate to my jacket and the overall scene. When looking at portraits, all of the previous mentioned apply when it comes to image quality, but for edge detection, the S23 does do an overall better job, even though it did blur out my right ear compared to both iPhones, which struggle around my head. I do like the more realistic look of the background blur on the iPhones at least. Last set of daylight shots with the rear cameras with me in the frame as a subject. As stated before, the skin tones are not perfect on all three, but I do prefer the skin tones slightly on the S23. But the look of the scene, color of my jacket and jeans is much preferred on the iPhones, and this has stayed consistent from the ultra wide through to the 3x zoom. When looking at the portrait mode, everything from the previous still stands when it comes to colors and detail. When looking at edge detection, not by much this time around, but the S23 still does a better job, while the actual look of the background blur on both iPhones look more pleasing and realistic, which I do prefer and like. Let's dim the lights down and move over to some low light images, starting with the landscape shots. And from the ultra wide without night mode active, all three do struggle and are unusable. Moving to the main wide sensor without night mode, I would say both iPhones look more natural, especially in the sky compared to the S23. This remains consistent in the 2x mode, and when in the 3x mode, both iPhones look better with less color shift compared to the Galaxy S23. Going through the same shot sequence again, but this time with night mode active, you can see a big difference on all images, especially on the ultra wide, making it far more usable and useful compared to when night mode was off. In the 3x mode, the S23 does produce a strange green tinge to the sky compared to the more natural look on both iPhones, which in this case, the iPhone 14 Pro look the best. Next is selfies, and without night mode active, the S23 definitely has the cleanest image compared to both iPhones. Night mode really cleans up the image on both iPhones, with the 15 Pro holding more detail and less noise compared to the iPhone 14 Pro, while the S23 does soften the image. When using a front screen flash, I definitely prefer the look of the Galaxy S23, followed by the iPhone 14 Pro and then the iPhone 15 Pro. When using portrait mode in low light without night mode active, the S23 takes the win big time, as both iPhones really struggle, especially the iPhone 14 Pro. What's also still a limitation on the iPhone 15 Pro and 14 Pro is that you still cannot use night mode and portrait mode together on the selfie. This is not a limitation on the S23, making it the definitive winner with and without night mode active. Both iPhones and the S23 do give you the option to use the front screen flash and portrait mode together, with the S23 still producing the best image, followed by the iPhone 14 Pro and then the iPhone 15 Pro. Let's wrap this up with the last set of low light images with the rear camera with me in the frame as a subject, starting with the ultrawide without night mode active, and the Galaxy S23 definitely steals the show with the best image, followed by the iPhone 14 Pro and then surprisingly the iPhone 15 Pro, with both iPhones generally producing a very noisy image. Things fare better when moving to the main wide sensor with night mode disabled. I still prefer the look of the Galaxy S23, with this time followed by the iPhone 15 Pro and then the 14 Pro. In the 2x mode with night mode disabled, the S23 holds a top shot, followed by the iPhone 15 Pro due to better colors compared to the iPhone 14 Pro, even though both iPhones are very noisy. In the 3x mode with night mode disabled, it's most likely all three phones are cropping in on the main wide sensor. Although all three are struggling, the S23 still holds the best shot, with both iPhones still producing a very noisy image. The biggest saving grace for both iPhones is indeed night mode, as now, from the ultrawide onwards to the 3x, the image produced on the iPhone 15 Pro especially is greatly improved and preferred, followed by the iPhone 14 Pro and the S23, all working great with night mode. Portrait mode in low light with night mode disabled from 1x, 2x to 3x modes shows overall the S23 producing the best image, with the iPhone 15 Pro matching up well in the 3x mode. A caution and word of warning: when using night mode on a rear camera with portrait mode on both iPhones, this will only work in a 1x mode, with the 2x and a 3x mode not able to work with both using night mode and portrait mode together. The S23 has no such limitation and works better, with a slight struggle in 3x mode. You do have the option to use the flash in portrait mode on all three phones, with the iPhone 15 Pro producing a very strong flash, followed by the iPhone 14 Pro and the Galaxy S23, which actually looks a bit more pleasing in a way. Quick conclusion of the video performance, starting with the selfie camera. All three phones match up pound for pound with the same recording modes up to 4K 60 and also 4K 30 with the cinematic and video portrait mode with the background blur. I still find it strange that when shooting in 4K 60 on both iPhones, there is still the same old problem with the reduction of dynamic range with blown out highlights. This is not an issue on the S23 in 4K 60 and seems to go away when you switch to 4K 30 on the iPhones. With the rear camera, big props to Apple for improving the video recording experience on the rear cameras in 4K 60, with the ability to switch between all three lenses while recording on the same clip, and also offering the smoothest lens transitions I've seen so far on a smartphone. Credit to Samsung for still offering the most flexible video capturing experience on a smartphone, especially in 4K 30, with the ability to switch between all the rear lenses, pause the video and continue recording, and also switch to the front camera and back to the rear cameras while still recording on the same clip. On top of that, you get usable 8K 30 frames a second video, and regardless of how useful it is to you or not, this is still impressive, just like how being able to record internal and external ProRes video with log on the iPhone 15 Pro also is. That is it with my ultimate three-way camera comparison between the iPhone 15 Pro, the Galaxy S23 and the iPhone 14 Pro. If you made it to the end, Put a fist bump emoji in the comments so I know that you're a real one. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's it for me, Ben from Lover of Tech. If you enjoy videos like this, you know exactly what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you're part of Team TLS, the Tech Lover Squad, so you don't miss any future videos on the channel. I hope you're all safe during this time. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.